The kitchen of Fahrenheit 9 was a universe of controlled chaos, a gleaming chrome and copper world where pressure was an ingredient in every dish. It was New York's newest, hottest restaurant, a place where reservations were a form of currency and the man in charge, Chef Anton Bella, was treated like a king. Right now that king was in the middle of a coronation of rage. The air, usually thick with the rich smells of simmering reductions and searing proteins, was now heavy with a different kind of heat. It was the heat of pure, unbridled fury. Anton, a man whose celebrity was as carefully crafted as his sauces, stood in the center of the service line. His face was a mask of theatrical disgust, his pale skin flushed red. Before him, on the pristine white floor, was a small, splattered mess. He had just spit out a mouthful of food. The silence that followed was louder than the usual clang of pots and pans. Every member of the kitchen staff, from the seasoned sous chefs to the nervous new prep cooks, was frozen in place. They looked like a photograph of a kitchen, not a real one. Their eyes were wide, their hands still. They knew this storm. They had seen it before. Anton's tempers were legendary, a part of the restaurant's toxic folklore. He believed fear made cooks better. He believed humiliation was a tool. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, a gesture of profound insult in a world built on refinement. His voice, when it came, was a low growl that cut through the silence. "Who," he began, his voice, dangerously soft, "made this disgrace?" He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The quiet menace was far more terrifying. He scanned the faces of his line cooks, his eyes like ice chips. Each one shook their head, a tiny, fearful motion. They were all disciples of his menu, loyal to his recipes. They wouldn't dare deviate. Their survival depended on it. The sous chef, a man named Ricardo who had long ago traded his spine for a steady paycheck, took a hesitant step forward. "Chef, it was not from the line. We are prepping your approved menu for the Critic tasting, nothing else." Anton's gaze sharpened. "Then where did it come from?" He gestured to the offending splatter on the floor with a flick of his wrist. "Did it just appear? Did a ghost cook wander into my kitchen and decide to serve garbage?" The question hung in the air unanswered. No one wanted to be the one to point the finger. But in a room where every station was monitored, every movement observed, there was only one possible source. Slowly, like a tide turning, every eye in the room shifted. They moved away from the gleaming stoves and prep stations, past the racks of expensive knives, and toward the back of the kitchen. They settled on the dish pit, the steamy, noisy corner that was its own separate, forgotten kingdom. And there, standing by the industrial sink, was Jamal Brooks. Jamal was a fixture in the background of Fahrenheit 9. He was the dishwasher, a role most of the kitchen staff considered invisible. He was tall and broad-shouldered, but he moved with a quiet efficiency that made him seem smaller. He never spoke unless spoken to. He kept his head down, his hands perpetually busy, his expression unreadable. He did his job, and he did it well. The clatter of plates was his only contribution to the symphony of the kitchen. Now, under the collective gaze of 24 people, he slowly looked up. He didn't seem surprised. He didn't seem scared. There was a profound calmness in his eyes, a stillness that was unnerving. He met Anton's glare without flinching. The sous chef, Ricardo, finally found his voice, though it was barely a whisper. "It was him, chef. It must have been him." All the energy in the room, all of Anton's volcanic anger, now had a target. Anton moved like a predator. He stalked from the service line to the dish pit, his expensive chef's whites parting the nervous staff like the Red Sea. He stopped directly in front of Jamal, invading his personal space, trying to loom over him. But Jamal didn't shrink. He simply stood his ground, his hands dripping with soapy water. "You," Anton sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You made this." Jamal looked at the plate on the counter, then at the mess on the floor. He gave a single, deliberate nod. The admission, so simple and so calm, seemed to enrage Anton more than any denial would have. "You're the dishwasher," Anton spat, the words intended to be an insult, a definition of Jamal's limits. "What gives you the right to touch my ingredients? To use my pans? To create that?" He pointed again at the floor. Jamal's voice, when he finally spoke, was even and low. It was a voice no one in that kitchen had ever really heard before. The sauce was breaking. I fixed it. This simple statement of fact was like gasoline on a fire. Anton's face contorted. The idea that a dishwasher, this man, could have fixed something his trained chefs had made, was an intolerable assault on his ego. "You fixed it," Anton laughed. A harsh, ugly sound. "You, a wannabe line cook with delusions of grandeur. You think you can cook in my kitchen?" He stepped even closer, his face inches from Jamal's. "You don't cook in my kitchen. You don't create. You wash. That's what you do. That's all you do." He looked around at the silent, watching staff. He was performing for them, reinforcing the hierarchy. "You're fired," Anton declared, his voice ringing with finality. "Get your things. Get out of my restaurant. Now." The words hung in the air, sharp and brutal. Fired. On the spot, for making a dish. The staff was stunned. They had seen Anton tear strips off people, humiliate them, even throw things. But a summary execution like this, for something so strange, was new. One of the youngest line cooks, a woman named Mia Carson, felt a knot of sickness in her stomach. Her heart was pounding. She had seen the whole thing. She had watched as the original source, a key component for the Critic's pre-test, had separated, turning into a greasy, unusable mess. She had seen the panic on the sous chef's face. And then, she had seen Jamal. He had moved from his station with a quiet grace, picked up a whisk, and with a few deft, almost magical movements, he had brought the sauce back to life. He hadn't just fixed it. He had transformed it. It smelled richer, deeper than before. He had poured a small amount into a tasting bowl, and pushed it onto the line, not for credit, but just to have it ready. He had saved them, and now he was being crucified for it. Mia opened her mouth. She wanted to say something. She wanted to scream. "He's right. He helped us." But the look in Anton's eyes, the cold, triumphant fury, froze the words in her throat. Fear was a powerful chain, and Anton held it tightly around all their necks. Jamal, however, seemed untouched by the drama. He simply held Anton's gaze for a long moment. Then, with that same unnerving calm, he nodded again. He turned to the hook on the wall, took off his dirty, wet apron, and laid it neatly on the counter. The act was deliberate, almost ceremonial. He didn't plead, he didn't argue, he didn't offer a single word of defense. He just accepted his fate. The silence in the kitchen was absolute, as Jamal walked away from the dish pit, his work boots echoing on the tiled floor. He was a ghost again. But this time, he was leaving the building. The king had spoken, and the invisible man had been cast out. He was just the quiet black dishwasher in the back of the kitchen. Never looked anyone in the eye, until the head chef spat his food out in front of everyone, called it garbage, and fired him on the spot. What no one knew, that same dishwasher had once owned a Michelin-starred restaurant, and one powerful food critic never forgot his flavor. By the end of the night, jaws would drop, the chef would be silenced, and the truth would leave the entire staff speechless. Before we find out what happens next, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if this story is already hitting home, don't forget to like and share. Now back to the kitchen, where things are about to boil over. Jamal walked through the swinging doors of the kitchen without a single backward glance. He moved past the prep stations, past the walk-in freezer, his path cleared by the stunned silence of his former colleagues. He didn't rush. His steps were measured, his back ramrod straight. It wasn't the walk of a man who had just been humiliated and fired. It was the walk of a man leaving a place he had already left long ago. As the doors swung shut behind him, Anton Bella let out a triumphant huff of air, as if expelling the last of the contamination. He turned back to his staff, his face still flushed with the thrill of power. He needed to reassert his dominance, to turn this moment into a lesson. "Let that be a warning to all of you," he announced, his voice booming in the now quiet kitchen. He paced in front of the line like a general addressing his troops after a necessary execution. "This is my house. My name is on the door. My reputation is on every plate. There is a hierarchy for a reason." He stopped and turned to his sous chef, "Ricardo, and you," he said, his voice dropping to a low, accusatory tone. "You almost let that dishwasher embarrass me. You let his little experiment get to the pass." Ricardo visibly flinched. "Chef, I didn't see him. It happened so fast." "Then watch faster," Anton barked. "Watch everything. Your only job is to protect my vision." He then looked around at the wider staff, a sneer playing on his lips. He leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial, venomous whisper that was somehow meant for everyone to hear. This is what happens when you let them get ambitious. Some people need to stay in their lane. A dishwasher trying to cook in a place like this, it's a joke. The racist undertone was unmistakable. It wasn't just about hierarchy. It was about race. A few of the older chefs, men who had hitched their wagons to Anton's star, chuckled nervously. It was a weak, sycophantic sound that filled the air with something sour. They were laughing because they were expected to laugh. They were laughing because it was safer than being silent. They were laughing because their boss had made a joke. And it didn't matter how ugly it was. But Mia Carson wasn't laughing. The sickness in her stomach had turned into a burning coal of anger and shame. She felt her own cowardice like a physical weight. She had stood there silent and watched a good man get thrown out for doing the right thing. She had seen him fix a problem that the so-called professionals couldn't handle. Anton's words about Jamal needing to stay in his lane echoed in her head. She looked at Anton, really looked at him. And for the first time she didn't see a brilliant culinary genius. She saw a bully, a small, insecure man who built his kingdom on the fear of others. The admiration she once held for him curdled into contempt. Her hands, hidden by her apron, clenched into tight fists. She wanted to quit on the spot, to throw her apron at his feet and walk out in solidarity. But her mind raced. She was a culinary school student. This job at Fahrenheit 9 was a dream internship, a golden ticket on her resume. Quitting would mean throwing that all away. It would mean going back to working diners and greasy spoons. It would mean disappointing her family, who were so proud of her. So she stayed silent. She kept her head down and her fists clenched, the conflict raging inside her. Outside, the world of Fahrenheit 9 disappeared. The back alley was a different reality. One of overflowing dumpsters, discarded milk crates, and the lingering smell of garbage. This was the service entrance, the unglamorous artery that kept the glittering restaurant alive. And there, sitting on an overturned plastic milk crate, was Jamal Brooks. He wasn't slumped, he wasn't fuming, he was just sitting, his large frame cloaked in the growing shadows of the late afternoon. The city's noise, the distant sirens, the rumble of a passing subway, seemed to keep a respectful distance. He looked like a man who was not broken, not defeated, but simply waiting. His posture was one of stoic patience, as if this was just an inconvenient pause in a much longer journey. He stared at the brick wall across from him, but his gaze seemed to go right through it, focused on something far away. A lesser man would have been cursing his luck, railing against the injustice. A lesser man would have been filled with a hot, bitter, but Jamal was filled with something else. It was a quiet, cold resolve. This was not the first time he had been kicked to the curb. It wasn't the first time he had lost everything. He had learned a long time ago that anger was a luxury. It burned you out, left you with nothing but patience. On the other hand, was a weapon. It was a shield. He sat there in the alley behind the restaurant that had just cast him out. And he waited. He didn't know for what exactly, but he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that this was not the end of the story. The chef inside was celebrating his victory, but the real battle hadn't even begun. The dish that Jamal had made was not a random act of defiance. It was a memory. It was a ghost from his past, a flavor he had carried with him from the golden days of Black Fire. The sauce Anton Bella had spat on the floor was a direct descendant of the one that had earned him his Michelin star. It was a symphony of complex flavors, a delicate balance of two very different worlds. It started with a classical French mother sauce, a velouté so perfect and silky it could have been served in any three-star Parisian restaurant. This was the foundation, the technique he had mastered through years of disciplined training. But then came the soul of the dish, the part that was uniquely his. He had infused it with the spirit of the Creole cooking he had grown up with. There was a whisper of smoked paprika, not enough to overpower but just enough to lend a subtle earthy warmth. There was a hint of filet powder, a secret ingredient that gave it a unique texture and a note of sassafras. And finally, the most audacious touch of all, a few drops of a rich, dark chicory coffee reduction. It was a flavor combination that made no sense on paper. It was bold, unconventional, and broke a dozen classical rules. But in Jamal's hands it became magic. It was the taste of New Orleans and Paris in a single spoonful. This was the flavor that had once brought Eleanor Graves, the most feared and respected food critic in the country, to the verge of tears. He remembered that night at Black Fire vividly. She had taken one bite of his signature short rib. Her famously stern expression had softened, and her eyes had welled up. She had written in her review that it was a dish that tasted like a memory you didn't even know you had. He hadn't made the sauce at Fahrenheit 9 for attention or for glory. He had done it out of a deep instinctual need. He couldn't stand to see food fail. It was an affront to his entire being. That afternoon he had been at his station in the dish pit. The roar of the water, a constant companion. When he had overheard the rising panic from the service line, the sous chef, Ricardo, was sweating, his voice tight with fear. "It's broken. The sauce is broken," he had hissed to one of the line cooks. "Anton will kill me. The Critic tasting is in an hour." Jamal had glanced over. He saw it was a greasy, separated mess. The fats pooling on the surface. It was ruined. He saw the young cooks trying frantically to fix it, adding more cornstarch, whisking furiously. But they were only making it worse. They were treating the symptom, not the cause. The problem was temperature and emulsion, a delicate dance they didn't understand. A part of him, the part that had learned to survive by being invisible, told him to stay put. It wasn't his problem, it wasn't his kitchen, but the chef in him, the artist, couldn't bear it. It was like watching a musician play a beautiful instrument horribly out of tune. Without thinking, he had dried his hands, walked over to the station, and gently taken the whisk from a nervous young cook. He didn't ask for permission. He just acted. He adjusted the heat, added a splash of cold water to shock the emulsion, and began to whisk. His movements were not frantic but slow, deliberate, and rhythmic. He knew exactly what the sauce needed. As he worked, he decided to add his own. He saw the high-quality paprika on the shelf, the espresso machine in the corner. An idea sparked. He added a pinch of this, a drop of that, transforming the broken sauce into something new, something better, something that was his. When he was done, the sauce was perfect. It was velvety, glossy, and the aroma was intoxicating. He poured a small amount into a tasting bowl and placed it on the pass, the metal counter where finished dishes were placed for pickup. He didn't say a word. He just turned and walked back to his dish pit, the roar of the water swallowing him once more. He thought it would be used quietly, a secret fix that no one would ever mention. He never imagined that Mia, the young line cook, would be brave or foolish enough to plate it and send it out for Anton to taste directly. He had made it because he couldn't help himself. He was a chef. It's what he did. He created. He fixed. He made things beautiful. Now, sitting on a milk crate in the alley, the memory of that flavor was a bittersweet comfort. He had been fired for it, but in a way it had also set him free. He had spoken his truth, not with words, but with and he knew, with a quiet certainty, that a flavor that powerful could not be silenced forever. It was a dish worth dying for, professionally speaking. And now that he had been cast out, he wondered if it might also be a dish worth fighting for. The alley faded from view, and the noise of the city dissolved. The present melted away, pulling back 3 years into the past. The scene reformed not in a grimy back alley, but in a warm, vibrant dining room. The air was filled with the sounds of soft jazz, happy chatter, and the clinking of wine glasses. The light was golden and inviting. On the wall, in elegant, understated script, were the words "Black Fire." This was Harlem, and this was Jamal Brooks' kingdom. He wasn't wearing a dishwasher's apron. He was dressed in immaculate chef's whites, a single prestigious Michelin star embroidered on the chest. He moved through his kitchen not with the quiet invisibility of a ghost, but with the confident, focused energy of a master at work. He was Chef Brooks, the owner and visionary behind New York's most celebrated new bistro. Black Fire was his soul-made manifest. It was a place where the comfort food of his Creole heritage danced with the refined techniques of classical French cuisine. It was a place of bold flavors and even bolder ideas. Critics didn't just write reviews of Black Fire. They wrote love letters. They spoke of his food in hushed, reverent tones. They called him a culinary prodigy, an artist who painted with flavor. In this memory, Jamal was smiling. It was a real, unguarded smile, as he watched his team work in perfect harmony. They weren't just staff, they were family. He had built this place from the ground up, pouring his life savings and every ounce of his passion into its foundation. He mentored young black chefs, giving them opportunities they would never find in the kitchens of men like Anton Bella. Black Fire wasn't just a restaurant. It was a statement. It was proof that fine dining wasn't confined to Midtown Manhattan, that a black chef could not only compete but could redefine the game entirely. His signature dish, the one that had won him the star, was a complex masterpiece, a slow braised short rib with a smoked paprika and coffee reduction, served over a parsnip and vanilla bean puree. It was a dish that spoke of his history, his genius, and his heart. People would book tables months in advance just to taste it. He had a business partner, a man named Marcus, who handled the finances. Jamal trusted him completely. He was the artist, Marcus was the numbers man. It was a perfect partnership, or so he thought. The memory shifted, the golden light turning cold and harsh. The jazz music was replaced by the shrill ringing of a telephone in the middle of the night. The happy chatter of the dining room gave way to the frantic, panicked voices of his staff. The downfall was swift, brutal, and total. Marcus, his trusted partner, had been running a sophisticated fraud scheme. He had used the restaurant as a front, embezzling funds, cooking the books, and taking out massive, illegal loans in the restaurant's name. When the scheme imploded, it took black fire down with it. The news was a media firestorm. Headlines screamed about fraud, scandal, and criminal investigations. Jamal's name, once praised in the food section, was now splashed across the front page for all the wrong reasons. He was legally cleared of any wrongdoing. The investigation proved he was a victim, just as much as the investors Marcus had swindled. But in the court of public opinion, guilt by association was a life sentence. The mud stuck. The blacklisting was immediate and merciless. Banks wouldn't touch him. Investors who had once begged to be a part of his next venture now wouldn't return his calls. The fine dining world, a small, insular community, closed its doors to him. His name was now associated with scandal, with failure. The Michelin star, once a symbol of his triumph, became a painful reminder of everything he had lost. The memory flickered again, showing a montage of pain. Jamal selling his car. Jamal moving out of his apartment. Jamal packing away his chef's coats and his awards into a dusty box. He lost his restaurant, his reputation, and his savings. He was left with nothing but his talent, and a world that no longer wanted it. He could have left the industry. He could have become bitter and angry. But the fire inside him, the one that gave his restaurant its name, wasn't extinguished. It was just banked, glowing quietly in the dark. So he did what he had to do to survive. He took the only jobs he could get, jobs where no one cared about his name or his past. He became a line cook in a chain hotel, a prep cook in a catering company, and eventually a dishwasher at Fahrenheit. It was a fall from grace, so steep it was almost unimaginable. But for Jamal it was a form of hiding in plain sight. He could stay close to the world he loved, the world of kitchens, without having to face the ghosts of his past. He could observe, he could learn, and he could wait. He told himself it was just about survival. But lately something had begun to stir within him. The artist inside refused to stay silent forever. In the quiet moments, after the dinner rush, he would find leftover ingredients, a forgotten piece of fish, some wilting herbs, and he would make a small dish, a perfect sauce, a flawless garnish. He would leave them on a clean plate on a back counter, anonymously. It was a way of speaking, of reminding himself that he was still a chef, even if no one knew it. These were his messages in a bottle, cast into the chaotic sea of the kitchen, small acts of defiance against a world that had tried to erase him. He was no longer just surviving. He was experimenting. He was remembering. And he was getting ready. Anton Bella was on top of the world. The confrontation with the dishwasher had been a spectacular display of his authority, and he felt invigorated by it. He saw the fear in his staff's eyes, and he mistook it for respect. In his mind, he hadn't just fired an insubordinate employee, he had purged a weakness from his system, reinforcing the absolute purity of his brand. To celebrate his decisive leadership, he decided to throw an impromptu party for the staff right there in the main dining room, after the last of the regular patrons had left. He had the bar staff pop open bottles of expensive champagne, the kind usually reserved for VIP. He wanted to create an air of celebratory loyalty, a feast after a successful hunt. He stood in the center of the room, a glass of bubbly in his hand, holding court. "To Fahrenheit 9, he toasted, his voice loud and self-congratulatory. "To a kitchen that understands excellence, to a team that knows its place." Some of the staff raised their glasses, murmuring the toast back at him. Others, like Mia, just held their glasses, the champagne feeling like acid in their mouths. She stood at the edge of the group, trying to be as invisible as possible. "Leadership," Anton continued, pontificating to his captive audience, "is about making hard decisions. It's about protecting the brand from amateurs, from people who think they can just walk in and play in the big leagues. Today we removed a threat to our standard." He took a dramatic sip of his champagne. "I want you all to forget that loser's name. He never existed. He was a ghost, and we exorcised him. From now on, his name is not to be spoken in this restaurant." He looked around the room, daring anyone to challenge him. No one did. The fear he cultivated was working perfectly. He was a king, addressing his loyal, terrified subjects. He felt magnanimous, powerful, and utterly in control. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, a flicker of annoyance on his face at the interruption. But his expression changed when he saw the caller ID. It was Eleanor Graves's personal assistant. He put on his most charming, professional voice. "Anton Bella speaking." He listened for a moment, his eyes lighting up. "Of course. Tomorrow night, a surprise tasting. We would be honored to have Graves grace us with her presence." "Yes, absolutely. We will be ready." He hung up the phone, a wide, triumphant grin spreading across his face. This was it, the big one. A review from Eleanor Graves could elevate Fahrenheit 9 from merely popular to legend. It could cement his legacy as one of the city's great chefs. That was Eleanor Graves, he announced to the room, his voice filled with smug importance. "She's coming in for a surprise tasting tomorrow night." A buzz went through the staff. This was the moment they had all been training for. The pressure was immense. "And I know exactly what we're going to serve her," Anton said, a devilish glint in his eye. He turned to Ricardo. "The dish from the pre-test today, the one we were working on before the interruption." Ricardo's eyes widened slightly. "Chef, the sauce was brilliant," Anton boomed, cutting him off. He truly believed it. In the chaos and his own rage, he had completely forgotten the panic over the broken sauce. His ego had rewritten the memory in real time. He now remembered the flavor of the dish he had tasted, the one Jamal had perfected, as his own creation. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated genius, and he had conceived it. The brief, unpleasant incident with the dishwasher was merely a distraction from his own brilliance. It was complex, it was bold, it was perfect, Anton continued, his arrogance inflating with every word. "It's the kind of flavor that will get her attention. It's a dish worthy of my name." He had no idea how true that statement was, but not in the way he was about to serve a dish created by the very man he had just humiliated and cast out, claiming it as his own masterpiece. Mia watched him, a cold dread washing over her. He was going to do it. He was actually going to steal Jamal's creation and present it to the most important food critic in the world. The audacity was breathtaking. He was so confident, so wrapped up in his own narrative of genius, that he couldn't see the gaping pit he was about to step into. He was a man walking confidently towards a cliff, admiring the view and praising himself for the path he was on. The party continued, but for Mia, it felt like a funeral. Anton was celebrating his own impending doom, and he was too arrogant to even know it. He preened and boasted, basking in the glow of his staff's forced admiration, all while the seeds of his destruction were saved on a tiny flash drive, waiting for the right moment to be planted. Mia Carson felt like she was going to be sick. She leaned against the cold stainless steel of her prep station, the adrenaline from the confrontation leaving her weak and shaky. The kitchen was slowly returning to a semblance of normalcy, but the air was still thick with tension. Anton was back in his office, his door shut, but his presence loomed over them all. The nervous chuckles from the other chefs had died down, replaced by a tense, uncomfortable silence. They were all avoiding each other's eyes, focusing intently on chopping vegetables or cleaning their station. They were all complicit. They were all cowards. And Mia felt like the biggest coward of them all. Her mind kept replaying the scene, Jamal's quiet dignity, Anton's ugly sneer, and her own frozen silence. The word she should have said was screaming in her head now. He was helping us.
The sauce was ruined. He saved you, chef.
But she had said nothing. The fear of losing her internship, of being blacklisted by the powerful chef Bella, had been a gag in her mouth. Mia, at 22, was ambitious. She was a Latina woman from the Bronx, fighting tooth and nail to make a name for herself in an industry dominated by men like Anton. This job at Fahrenheit 9 was everything to her. It was her way out, her chance to prove herself. She had always admired Anton's talent, his precision, his fame. She had wanted to be like him, but now that admiration felt like poison. She saw him for what he was, a tyrant who stole credit and crushed anyone he saw as a threat. What he had done to Jamal wasn't just unfair, it was cruel, and his racist comments had turned her stomach. A thought suddenly struck her, sharp and urgent. The cameras. The kitchen was filled with security cameras, a measure Anton had installed to monitor efficiency, but everyone knew it was to watch them. The entire incident, the broken sauce, Jamal stepping in, his firing, it would all be on tape. A spark of defiance lit within her. It was a small spark, but it was enough to make her move. On the pretense of cleaning her station, she edged her way toward the small back office where the security monitor was located. Ricardo, the sous chef, was in there, looking pale and stressed, probably replaying his own failure to control the situation. Chef wants me to double-check the inventory for tomorrow's delivery, Mia said, her voice surprisingly steady. Ricardo just grunted, not even looking up from his paperwork. He was too wrapped up in his own misery to be suspicious. Mia's heart pounded in her chest as she moved to the security console. Her hands trembled slightly as she navigated the system, her culinary school tech classes suddenly coming in handy. She found the footage from the last hour. She scrolled back, her breath catching in her throat, and there it was, crystal clear video. The panic around the stove, the greasy, separated sauce, and then Jamal, moving with an expert's grace, his hands a blur as he whisked and seasoned. The camera angle was perfect. It captured everything. The transformation of the sauce was undeniable. Then it showed him placing the tasting bowl on the pass before retreating back to his corner. The proof was irrefutable. Jamal hadn't been a wannabe line cook with delusion. He had been a master, stepping in to save them all from their boss's wrath. A wave of anger washed over her, stronger this time, pushing back the fear. This wasn't just about Jamal anymore. It was about the truth. She looked around the office. There was a flash drive sitting on the desk, forgotten next to a stack of invoices. Without a second thought, she slipped it into the USB port. The file transfer felt like it took an eternity. Every click of the mouse, every whir of the computer felt deafeningly loud. Finally, it was done. She ejected the drive and slipped it into the pocket of her apron, her fingers closing around the small, smooth plastic. It felt heavy, like a stone. She took a deep breath and walked out of the office, out of the kitchen, and through the back door into the alley. The cool evening air was a relief after the suffocating tension inside. Jamal was still there, sitting on the lithe crate, exactly as he had been. He looked up as she approached, his expression calm and questioning. She stopped in front of him, the flash drive clutched in her hand. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, the words feeling small and inadequate. "I should have said something. I saw what you did. You saved us." Jamal just watched her, his gaze steady. "Fear keeps a lot of people quiet," he said, his voice devoid of judgment. It was a simple statement of, "I know," she whispered, ashamed. "But I got this." She held out the flash drive. "It's the security footage. It shows everything. The source. You fixing it. All of it." Jamal looked at the small plastic drive in her hand, then back at her face. He saw the conflict in her eyes, the mix of fear and determination. He saw a younger version of himself. He didn't take the drive immediately. "What do you want me to do with this?" he asked softly. "I don't know," Mia admitted, her voice trembling slightly. I couldn't let him get away with it. It's not right." For the first time, a small, genuine smile touched the corners of Jamal's mouth. It was a soft, gentle expression that transformed his stoic face. He finally reached out and took the flash drive from her, his large fingers closing around it. "Thank you, Mia," he said. The way he said her name with a quiet respect made her feel braver than she had all day. "You've done more than you know." He stood up, towering over her. "Don't you worry about this," he said, tucking the drive into his pocket. "You just keep your head down for now, but be ready." "Ready? For what?" she asked. Jamal looked back toward the restaurant, a new light in his eyes. "Be ready to stand up when it really counts." With that, he gave her a final reassuring nod and walked away down the alley, disappearing into the twilight of the city. Mia stood there for a long moment, the weight in her pocket gone, replaced by a strange mix of terror and hope. She had chosen a side. Now she just had to wait and see what the battle would bring. The next day, the atmosphere in the kitchen was thick with a nervous energy that was different from the day before. The fear of Anton was still present, but now it was mixed with the high-stakes pressure of cooking for Eleanor Graves. Every chef and cook was on edge, moving with a sharp, anxious precision. Anton, however, was in his element. He strode through the kitchen like a conductor on opening night, tasting sauces, inspecting produce, and barking orders. His confidence was absolute, bordering on manic. He was convinced that the dish he was preparing would be his magnum opus. But beneath the surface of frantic preparation, a current of whispers had begun to flow. The staff, emboldened by Anton's absence during his frequent smoke breaks or phone calls, started talking in hushed tones. The incident with Jamal had unsettled them more than they had let on. "Did you taste that sauce yesterday?" one of the line cooks whispered to another while chopping Myra Pue. "I've never tasted anything like that from Chef." The other cook nodded, not looking up from his work. "I know. The recipe he gave Ricardo was for a standard velouté. What he tasted, that was something else." "It was Jamal, wasn't it?" the first cook said, the question hanging in the air. "Had to be." Ricardo was panicking because the sauce split. Then suddenly, "It's perfect," and Jamal gets fired 2 minutes later. The whispers spread from station to station, a quiet rebellion of shared doubt. They had all seen Jamal's quiet competence. They had seen him organize the dish pit with an efficiency that was almost artistic. They knew he was more than just a dishwasher. Now the pieces were starting to click into place. He hadn't just been fired for insubordination, he had been fired for being better. Mia kept her head down, her face a mask of concentration. She didn't participate in the gossip, but she heard every word. Her silence was now a different kind of silence. It wasn't born of fear, but of knowledge. She was holding the key to the entire situation, and she felt its weight with every passing moment. She remembered Jamal's words. "Be ready to stand up when it really counts." She didn't know when that moment would be, but she knew it was coming. Her eyes, however, betrayed her. Whenever another cook would catch her gaze, she would give a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a silent confirmation, a shared secret that bonded them in their quiet descent. Anton, oblivious to the undercurrent of suspicion, was on a full-blown power trip. The impending arrival of the famous Critic had amplified his worst tendencies. He was a volcano of ego, erupting on anyone who showed the slightest sign of imperfection. He saw a busboy trip and sneeze near the dining room entrance. "You're a health hazard," Anton screamed, his face turning a blotchy red. "You're fired. Get out." The young man, barely a teenager, looked stunned, tears welling in his eyes as he was escorted out. A few minutes later, a waiter presented a bottle of wine for Anton to inspect, a Chardonnay for the fish course. Anton looked at the label with disdain. "Are you an idiot? This is the 08. I specifically asked for the 07. The tasting notes are completely different. Are you trying to sabotage me?" "I'm sorry, chef," the waiter stammered. "The cellar is out of the 07. Then you should have known that and informed me," Anton roared. "I can't work with amateurs." He waved a dismissive hand. "You're on probation. One more mistake and you're gone." He seemed to delight in the fear he created. Each act of humiliation, each firing, seemed to fuel his sense of control. He was purifying his kingdom, ensuring that only the most loyal and terrified subjects remained for the arrival of the great Critic. He ridiculed anyone who even mentioned the strange events of the day before. When Ricardo, the sous chef, cautiously asked about the unique ingredients for the sauce, Anton shot him a look of pure contempt. "Are you questioning my palate, Ricardo? Are you suggesting I don't know my own creations? It's called inspiration. It's what separates chefs from maybe if you had any, you wouldn't need me to hold your hand every step of the way." He tapped his temple. "It's all up here. Now stop asking stupid questions and get back to work. You are all lucky to be in my kitchen. Remember." The staff fell silent again, the whispers dying down whenever he was near, but the seed of doubt had been planted. They were no longer just his loyal troops. They were a captive audience, waiting to see if their tyrant's arrogance would finally be his undoing. And Mia, with the truth in her pocket and Jamal's words in her heart, knew that the final act was about to begin. Jamal sat in his small, sparsely furnished apartment. The room was neat and tidy, but it felt temporary, like a place where someone was just passing through. The walls were mostly bare, except for one corner. There, pinned to a corkboard, were the ghosts of his past life. There was a faded newspaper clipping with the headline "Black Fire, the hottest reservation in town." There was a photo of him with his beaming kitchen staff, and in the center, a framed certificate of his Michelin star, a painful and proud relic. For 3 years, this corner had been a source of quiet torment, but tonight, it felt different. It felt like a war room. He looked at the flash drive Mia had given him. It was a small, simple object, but it held the power to reclaim his story. He knew he couldn't just release the video to the press. It would be his word, the word of a disgruntled ex-employee, against that of the celebrated chef Bella. It needed a bigger stage. It needed an unimpeachable witness. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over a number he hadn't dialed in years. It was a number he knew by heart. Eleanor Graves. She was more than just a food critic. She was a legend. Her palate was considered infallible. Her integrity absolute. A word from her could make or break the biggest names in the culinary world. She had been the one to discover him at Black Fire. Her glowing review had put him on the map. She hadn't just praised his food. She had understood it. She had understood him. He remembered her telling him that his cooking had a signature, a flavor that was as unique and identifiable as a fingerprint. Taking a deep breath, he pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice. He almost hung up, his nerve failing him. Then, a voice on the other end answered, crisp and professional. Eleanor Graves. There was no hello, just her name. It was exactly as he remembered. Eleanor, he said, his own voice sounding rusty to his ears. It's Jamal Brooks. There was a pause on the other end of the line. For a moment he thought she had hung up, or wouldn't remember him. But then her voice came back, softer this time, with a note of surprise and warmth. Jamal, my God. I've wondered where you went. Are you all right? I'm all right, Eleanor, he said. He didn't have time for a long explanation of the last 3 years. He had to be direct. He had to be bold. I need to ask you for something. Not a favor. A tasting. One last tasting. A tasting? She asked. Her curiosity piqued. You've opened a new place. Where is it? I'll be there tomorrow. It's not my place, Jamal said carefully. And I'm not the chef. Not officially. He chose his next words with extreme care. You have a tasting scheduled for tomorrow night, I believe, at Fahrenheit 9. Another pause. He could almost hear her thinking, connecting the dots. Yes, I do, she said slowly. What about it? Just go, Jamal said. And when you taste the signature dish, I want you to remember. Remember the flavor. He let that sink in. Same flavor, Eleanor. New kitchen, you'll know it when you taste it. The line was silent for a long moment. Jamal knew he was asking her to trust him, to put her own reputation on the line based on a cryptic clue. Jamal, what is this about? She asked, her voice now serious. It's about the truth, he said simply. The truth always seasons the pot, you just have to let it simmer. It was a phrase he used to say at Black Fire, something she had even quoted in her review. He knew she would remember it. All right, Jamal, she said finally, her voice firm with decision. I'll be there. Then she added one more thing. A sentence that changed everything. And I'm bringing a photographer. Jamal's heart leaped. A photographer, that meant she wasn't just coming for a review. She was coming ready for a story. Thank you, Eleanor, he said. The words filled with a gratitude that went far beyond the phone call. No, Jamal, she replied. Thank you. I have a feeling this is going to be a very interesting dinner. He hung up the phone. A slow, determined smile spreading across his face. He looked at his reflection in the dark screen of his phone. The dishwasher was gone. The chef was back. Anton Bella was preparing for a taste. He had no idea he was actually preparing for a trial. And the judge was on her way. The dining room of Fahrenheit 9 was electric. The low, golden light cast a soft glow on the faces of the wealthy patrons, their hushed conversations, a symphony of power and privilege. The staff moved with a silent, almost balletic precision, their nerves hidden behind practiced smiles. This was the big night. At a corner table, cloaked in an aura of quiet authority, sat Eleanor Graves. She was an older woman with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Beside her, a young man with a discreet camera bag sat quietly, pretending to be a dining companion. Every member of the staff was acutely aware of her presence. Anton Bella was preening. He made a grand tour of the dining room, stopping by tables, flashing his celebrity smile, soaking in the admiration. He made sure to walk past Eleanor's table several times, offering a deferential nod, which she returned with a cool, unreadable expression. He was a peacock displaying his feathers, completely unaware that the hunter was already watching him through a scope. In the kitchen, the tension was at its peak. Every cook, every chef, was focused on the single dish that would soon go to Eleanor's table. The dish. Jamal's dish. Anton stood at the pass, inspecting the plate with an obsessive focus. It was a work of art. The braised short rib was glistening, the parsnip puree was a perfect, smooth swirl, and the sauce, that dark, mysterious sauce, was drizzled around it in a beautiful, glossy ring. He had replicated it perfectly, or rather, he had his team replicate the memory of a flavor he now believed was his. "It's perfect," he whispered to himself, a smug smile on his face. "Send it out." A waiter, his hands trembling almost imperceptibly, lifted the plate and carried it out of the kitchen, as if he were carrying a crown. The entire kitchen staff seemed to hold its breath, their work pausing as they watched the dish leave. Mia felt her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it. The moment of truth. In the dining room, the plate was placed before Eleanor Graves with reverent care. She looked at it for a long moment, her expression unreadable. She picked up her fork and knife, the faint clink of silver on ceramic the only sound at her table. She cut a small piece of the meat, making sure to swipe it through the dark, rich sauce. The world seemed to slow down. Anton watched from across the room, a triumphant grin fixed on his face. He was waiting for the nod of approval, the smile of pleasure. He was waiting for his coronation. Eleanor lifted the fork to her lips. She took the bite. And then, she froze. It was not a dramatic, theatrical freeze. It was a subtle, profound stillness. Her fork hovered in midair. Her eyes, which had been sharp and analytical, suddenly softened. They lost focus, looking inward, as if the flavor on her tongue had transported her to another time, another place. A single perfect tear welled up in the corner of her eye, and traced a slow path down her cheek. Anton's smile faltered. That was not the reaction he was expecting. Pleasure, yes. Delight, certainly. But tears, that was something else entirely. Eleanor slowly lowered her fork, placing it carefully on the side of her plate. She looked at the dish, then looked up, her gaze sweeping the room until it landed on Anton. Her expression was no longer soft. It was hard as steel. "This," she said, her voice quiet but carrying an immense weight that seemed to silence the tables around her. This was his dish. The words hung in the air, sharp and clear. Anton, who had started to walk towards her table, stopped dead in his tracks. A cold knot of confusion and fear began to form in his stomach. "His dish?" he asked, forcing a confused laugh. "I'm not sure what you mean, Eleanor. It's my latest creation." Eleanor ignored him. She turned to the waiter who was hovering nervously nearby. "Please, tell me," she said, her voice calm but insistent. "Who made this dish? Who is the chef responsible for this sauce?" The waiter looked panicked, his eyes darting towards Anton. It's Chef Bella's dish, ma'am," he stammered. "It's his new signature." Eleanor said, her eyes locking back onto Anton's. A dangerous fire was kindling in their depths, "because I would swear on my life, and on my reputation, that I have tasted this sauce before. Only once. Years ago. In a little bistro in Harlem." Anton's face began to lose its color. Harlem, Black Fire. The name echoed in the dark corners of his memory. He suddenly remembered the whispers about the dishwasher's past. A wave of nausea hit him. It couldn't be. Eleanor placed her napkin on the table. The meal was over. She then turned to her assistant, the man with the camera bag. "Henry," she said, her voice ringing with command. "Start recording." The assistant nodded, and with a quiet click, a small professional-grade camera was out of the bag, its red recording light blinking like a single, accusing eye. The show was about to begin. Just as the red light on the camera began to blink, the grand double doors to the kitchen swung open with a soft whoosh. They didn't slam, they opened with a quiet, deliberate purpose, as if pushed by an invisible hand of fate, and in the doorway, framed by the bright, chaotic light of the kitchen behind him, stood Jamal Brooks. He was no longer the stooped, invisible dishwasher. He was transformed. He wore a crisp, black chef's coat, the kind he used to wear at Black Fire. It was clean, pressed, and fit his broad shoulders perfectly. It was like armor. His face was calm, his eyes steady. He looked directly at Anton, across the sea of shocked and silent diners. The entire restaurant, which had been buzzing with confused whispers, fell completely silent. Every head turned. First to the legendary Critic holding court, then to the disgraced chef turning pale, and now to the mysterious black man standing in the kitchen doorway, dressed like a king reclaiming his throne. Anton was the first to break the silence. He let out a short, incredulous laugh, a sound high-pitched with panic. "What is he doing here?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "I fired him. Someone get him out of here. Security." But no one moved. The staff was frozen, caught between their fear of Anton and the powerful, unfolding drama. They were no longer employees. They were the audience. Eleanor Graves rose slowly from her chair. Her movement commanded the attention of the entire room. She stood to her full height, a figure of immense authority, and looked at Jamal with a mixture of recognition and profound respect. "I invited him," she said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the tension. Her words landed like stones in a silent pool. She then turned her steely gaze back to Anton. "Or rather, I invited the man who created the dish I was just served. And that man is Jamal Brooke." She pointed a single accusatory finger at the plate. "And I knew this flavor. I would know it anywhere. I tasted it for the first time at a restaurant called Black Fire. It was Chef Brooks's signature. His masterpiece. A dish that won him a Michelin star." Anton's face, which had been pale, was now ashen. The blood had drained from it completely. He looked from Eleanor to Jamal, his mind struggling to process the impossible reality crashing down around him. That's a lie," he stammered, his voice weak. "He's a dishwasher. He's trying to ruin me." "Plagiarized," Eleanor said, the word sharp and precise. "That's the word you're looking for. You plagiarized him." At that moment, another figure stepped out from behind Jamal. It was Mia. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her ears, but she walked forward, her steps steady. She had made her choice. She would not be a coward tonight. "She's telling the truth," Mia said, her voice trembling but clear. She stopped beside Eleanor's table, avoiding eye contact with Anton. She knew if she looked at him, her nerve might fail. "I saw it. We were all going to be in trouble because the sauce for the tasting was ruined. Jamal fixed it. He didn't just fix it. He made it into..." She gestured to the plate. "Chef Bella fired him for it. And then he took credit." Anton looked at her with pure venom. "You're fired too, you little traitor," he shrieked, his composure completely shattering. But his threats were empty now. He had lost control of the room. Mia didn't flinch. She reached into her apron pocket, her hand closing around the small flash drive. She pulled it out and held it up for Eleanor to see. "And I have the proof," she said. "It's all on the kitchen security footage." The flash drive, so small and insignificant, glinted in the low light of the dining room. It was the final piece of the puzzle, the irrefutable evidence. Jamal still hadn't said a word. He just stood there, a silent, powerful presence, at the edge of the scene, allowing the truth to unfold on its own. He didn't need to speak. His food had already spoken for him, and now, the people he had inspired were speaking for him too. The king was about to be checkmate. Days later, the newly christened Black Fire at Fahrenheit 9 was having its grand opening. The dining room was packed, filled with a diverse crowd of foodies, journalists and people who had been moved by Jamal's incredible story. The energy was electric, not with the tense formality of the old restaurant, but with a vibrant, joyful anticipation. In the kitchen, there was no fear, only a focused, harmonious buzz. Jamal was at the helm, a calm and confident leader. He didn't shout or demur. He guided, he taught, and he inspired. He moved through the kitchen with a quiet authority that commanded more respect than Anton's rages ever had. Mia was at his side, thriving in her new role as sous chef. She called out orders with a clear, steady voice, her confidence growing with every plate that went out. She was no longer a hesitant student, she was a leader in her own right. During a brief lull in the service, she stood next to Jamal at the pass, watching the beautiful plates of food go out to the waiting diners. The signature short rib dish was on the menu, its flavor now a symbol of truth and redemption. "I can't believe this is real," Mia said, a look of awe on her face. "Just a week ago, I was terrified to even speak up." Jamal looked at her, a warm, proud smile on his face. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Truth always seasons the pot, Mia," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "You just have to have the patience to let it simmer. Sometimes it takes a long time, but eventually, it brings out the real flavor of everything. She understood what he meant. The truth about Anton, the truth about Jamal's talent, the truth about her own courage, it had all been simmering beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The final service of the night was a triumph. As the last dessert went out, a cheer erupted in the kitchen. The staff, filled with a shared sense of accomplishment, applauded their new chef. Jamal simply nodded, a deep sense of gratitude washing over him. He had his life back. He had his name back. But more importantly, he had his fire back. He had found his place at the table again, not by fighting with his fists, but by staying true to his craft and trusting in the power of his own gifts. On the wall of the restaurant's entrance, a new plaque was installed. It was simple and elegant. It read, "Head Chef, Jamal Brooks." It was a statement to the world that he was here to stay. Never mistake silence for weakness, because sometimes the quietest hands carry the greatest fire. In the aftermath of Anton's spectacular fall from grace, a new energy began to fill Fahrenheit 9. The heavy cloud of fear and toxicity that had hung over the staff for so long had finally lifted, replaced by a sense of liberation and a tentative hope. The owner, Mr. Harrison, a shrewd businessman who knew how to turn a disaster into an opportunity, acted quickly. He understood that the story of the hidden flame, the brilliant black chef rediscovered in his own kitchen, was a powerful narrative. It was a story of justice, redemption, and incredible talent. It was a story that could save his restaurant. The very next day, he called a meeting. He sat down at a table with Jamal and Mia. Eleanor Graves was also there, not as a critic, but as a witness and an advocate. Mr. Harrison looked at Jamal, his eyes filled with a newfound respect. "Chef Brooks," he said, the title feeling right and natural. "I am deeply sorry for what happened in my restaurant. I have failed to see the talent that was right in front of me, and I have allowed a toxic environment to fester." He paused, leaning forward. "I would like to make things right. I want to offer you a position, not just as a line cook, but as a partner. I want to give you your own section of the restaurant. We can rebrand it, call it Black Fire at Fahrenheit 9. You would have complete creative control. Your menu, your staff, your vision." Jamal was taken aback. He had come seeking justice, not a kingdom. He looked at Mia, who was watching him with wide, hopeful eyes. He looked at Eleanor, who gave him a subtle, encouraging nod. This was more than he could have dreamed of. It was a chance to rebuild, not from scratch, but from the ashes of his old life, with the foundation of a major restaurant group to support him. He thought for a long moment, then gave a single firm nod. "I accept," he said, his voice steady. Mr. Harrison then turned to Mia. "And you, young lady," he said with a smile, "your courage and integrity are qualities I value. I believe a chef needs a strong second in command they can trust. I am promoting you to sous chef, to work directly under Chef Brooks." Mia's jaw dropped. Sous. It was a title she had dreamed of holding one day, years in the future. Tears of joy and relief welled in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." The news spread through the restaurant like wildfire. The staff, who had been uncertain about their future after Anton's firing, were now buzzing with excitement. The man they had whispered about, the secret genius from the dish pit, was now their leader. The mood was transformed. There was laughter in the kitchen, a sense of camaraderie that had never existed under Anton's reign of terror. True to her word, Eleanor Graves published her story, but it wasn't just a restaurant review. It was a sweeping feature piece that ran in the Sunday magazine, complete with the dramatic photos her assistant had taken. The headline was bold and captivating. "The hidden flame returns. Black fire rises from the ashes at Fahrenheit 9. The article went viral. It was shared thousands of times on social media. People were captivated by the story of Jamal Brooks, the Michelin-starred chef, who had lost everything, only to be rediscovered through the undeniable power of his own creation. The story of his public vindication and Anton's spectacular downfall was the talk of the town. The restaurant was flooded with reservation requests. People didn't just want to taste the food, they wanted to be a part of the story. They wanted to support the underdog, the quiet hero who had finally gotten his due. Later that week, after the whirlwind of press and reorganization had settled, Jamal stood in his new kitchen. It was his kitchen now. He looked out at his new team, a mix of old Fahrenheit 9 staff, who had stayed, and new young cooks he had hired. Mia stood beside him, her new sous chef coat crisp and white. He felt a sense of peace settle over him, a feeling he hadn't known in years. He finally let out a long, slow breath. A breath he felt like he had been holding for 3 years. It was a breath of release, of arrival. The fight was over. It was time to cook. The collective gasp that swept through the dining room was a physical thing. A wave of shock and disbelief. Jaws literally dropped. The patrons who had come for an expensive meal were now getting a front-row seat to the public execution of a celebrity chef's career. The air crackled with scandal. All eyes were on Anton. The color had completely vanished from his face, leaving behind a pasty gray mask of sweat and terror. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. The arrogant, powerful man from an hour ago was gone, replaced by a cornered, pathetic figure. He looked around frantically, searching for an ally, a friendly face, anyone who would back him up, but he found nothing. The staff, his loyal, terrified staff, stared back at him with cold, disillusioned eyes. His sous chef, Ricardo, stood near the kitchen entrance, looking at the floor, refusing to meet his gaze. The waiters and busboys, whom he had terrorized for months, watched with a quiet, grim satisfaction. He had built his kingdom on fear, and now, in his moment of need, he found himself utterly alone. His reign was over. Jamal finally moved. He walked slowly from the kitchen entrance into the center of the dining room, his calm, deliberate steps echoing in the dead silence. He stopped a few feet from Anton. He still didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just looked Anton directly in the eye. In his gaze there was no anger, no triumph, no malice. There was only a profound and unshakable truth. It was the look of a man who had been to hell and back, and had nothing left to fear. That quiet, steady gaze was more damning than any accusation. It stripped Anton of all his bluster, all his defenses, leaving him exposed and raw. Suddenly a new voice cut through the silence, sharp and authoritative. Anton. A well-dressed man in a tailored suit stepped forward from the crowd of onlookers. It was Mr. Harrison, the owner of the restaurant group that backed Fahrenheit. He had been quietly dining in a secluded booth, having shown up to support his star chef during the Critic's visit. His face was a thundercloud of fury and embarrassment. His multi-million-dollar investment was imploding in front of a room full of New York's elite, and a journalist who was recording the whole thing. "Mr. Harrison," Anton croaked, his voice desperate. "This is a misunderstanding. It's a setup. This dishwasher is trying to destroy me." Mr. Harrison ignored his pleas. He walked straight up to Anton, his eyes cold with rage. "Take it off," he commanded, his voice low and dangerous. "What?" Anton asked, confused. "Your apron," Mr. Harrison said, his voice dropping even lower. "Take it off. Now. You are a disgrace to this establishment." The order was so brutal, so final, that another gasp went through the room. It was the ultimate humiliation for a chef, a symbolic stripping of his rank and identity. "But my name is on the restaurant," Anton protested, his voice rising in panic. "Not anymore," Mr. Harrison said coldly. He turned to Jamal, his expression shifting from anger to a grudging respect. "Is what they're saying true? Is this your dish?" Jamal gave a single, slow nod. "Then you, sir," Mr. Harrison said, "are a chef. And this man," he gestured to Anton with disgust, "is a fraud." Anton, finally realizing that there was no way out, began to unravel completely. "You can't do this to me," he shrieked, his voice echoing through the silent room. "I made this place. I am Fahrenheit 9. He looked around wildly, his eyes finally landing on Mia. "She's lying. They're all lying." But his ranting fell on deaf ears. His power was gone. His credibility was shattered. No one backed him up. No one defended him. He was just a loud, pathetic man in the middle of a room that had already condemned him. Mr. Harrison motioned to his security team. 2 large men in black suits moved swiftly to Anton's side. They didn't touch him, but their presence was a clear and final statement. The show was over. Anton, Bella, the celebrated culinary king, looked around one last time at the ruins of his empire. Then, with trembling hands, he untied the strings of his apron and let it fall to the floor. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.